Greetings, everyone. So this video is all about my variation on a wonderful card trick created by Professor Bessey, which he entitled A Quick and Easy Self-Working Card Trick That Will Make Anyone Smile. And it was posted on the Absolute Math Magic channel on March 24th, 2025. Now I'm going to start at the point where everything is reduced down to 7 cards that the spectator has chosen at random. I'm not going to bother doing the intro. You can watch the original video where the deck is shuffled, 4 cards are taken out at random. 7 cards are taken out at random. The magician knows none of the cards. And in that video, after the 7 cards were chosen, the spectator can shuffle those, they can cut those. And finally, the Queen of Hearts was the selection. In other words, when they were done cutting and shuffling the 7 cards, they are to look at the top card while the magician looks away. But we all know it was the Queen of Hearts, just as it was on Professor Video's original video. I'm using the same card as a selection, just for ease of comparison. Okay, so at that point, what Professor Bessey does is a Klondike shuffle. So after the spectator looks at it and remembers their card, the magician says, we're going to randomize the cards a bit here by doing a Klondike shuffle. And then the 3-hour clock shuffle is done like this. Now, when that happens, the selection will always be the top card of this, I'll call it the south pile of the triangle. So, or the bottom pile from the magician's vantage point. It will always be here. So when Professor Bessey gathered up the cards, he always gathered them up starting with the top left pile, again from my vantage point, the top left pile, and gathered them up clockwise. And when you do the 3-hour clock shuffle again, same thing's going to happen. The selection will end up on top of this bottom pile. So we'll call this the status quo. Every time this happens, with the selection being on top of the bottom pile, that's called the status quo. Now what I've done is I've tried to vary this a little bit to add some convincers, I guess you could say. I'm going to show you the sheet I prepared, and in a second. The sheet will be about letting the spectator, first of all, point to any pile, and secondly, after they point to that pile, you can ask them which direction you want them to have you gather the cards up. So let's say, for example, they pointed to this pile here, and they wanted you to gather them up in this direction, which would be counterclockwise. Actually, counterclockwise from my point of view, and counterclockwise from the spectator's point of view, if they're over here, would be the exact same thing. So let's say they wanted this pile and they want to go this direction counterclockwise. Well, nothing changes. If you deal out the 3-hour clock shuffle again, it will restore the status quo. So whether you go this way, like Professor Bessey did each time, or you go this way, starting with the top right and going, going counterclockwise, it'll still be the same thing. The status quo will be restored. But what if, for example, they picked the top left pile and they wanted you to go counterclockwise, which would be like this. Okay, well, this is where you can really kind of make it look kind of convincing. If that happens, you gather them up counterclockwise like this, and you split off 3 cards from the top and do an inner faro. I'm sure if you've watched Professor Bessey's other videos, you've seen what a faro is. So there's 3 cards here and 4 here, so the inner faro would look like this. It really looks to a spectator like you're mixing the cards. And at that point, you would do another Klondike. And what that will do is when you do your 3-hour clock shuffle, that will restore the status quo. But let's say they picked this pile, the top right, and they wanted to go clockwise. Okay? All right, so let's do that. So each time they're making these choices, they're picking the pile they want to start with, and they're picking the direction they want to go in. Well, this time you do the same thing. You split off 3 cards and do the same interfaro shuffle, but you don't do the Klondike shuffle. You just go right into the 3-hour clock. And that will, guess what? Restore the status quo. Now, anytime they pick the bottom, it doesn't matter whether they want you to go clockwise or counterclockwise. Anytime they pick the bottom, it's going to be the same thing that you're going to do. So let's say they pick the bottom and they want you to go clockwise. So gather them up clockwise. All you have to do at this point is a Klondike shuffle. No pharaohs, just one Klondike shuffle. And when you deal out again into your 3-hour clock shuffle, that will restore the status quo. Same thing if you go this way, counterclockwise, with the bottom first. Do your Klondike. And deal out to your 3-hour clock. And again, the status quo will be returned. So I'm going to hold this up for a minute. This way you can, I've written out all the choices and what you would do in each case. Okay. So if you want to take the time to do this, and it's kind of a nice mental exercise and it's kind of fun to do, and you can work it out yourself. But go through it one more time, okay? So here we are in the status quo, right? Now again, in Professor Bessie's video, he always gathered up the cards starting with the top left from my vantage point and going clockwise and dealing them out, of course. That will restore the status quo. But if you did it in reverse and you started with the top right and you went counterclockwise, just the opposite, that would still yield the same result. You can see this all on the piece of paper. You can see there's the status quo. Now, let's say the top left, they want to go this way. They start with the top left and they want to go counterclockwise. This is the most complicated one, but it's also the most convincing one because you split off 3 cards and you do your interfaro, like so. And then you do your Klondike, like so. And then you go to your 3-hour home base. And again, you have your status quo. But let's say they pick the top right and they want to go clockwise. So you go this way. Same thing, you split off 3 cards, do the interfaro again. But you skip the Klondike and you can go right into this and it brings you right back to the status quo. Now, anytime they pick the bottom, doesn't matter which way you go, clockwise or counterclockwise. So if they pick the bottom and they want you to gather them up clockwise fashion, well, all you got to do is a Klondike. So bottom, always it's just one Klondike. And then go to your home base into your 3-hour clock. And that will restore the status quo. Same thing if you go this way, counterclockwise, starting with the bottom. Do your Klondike. And 3-hour clock. And you're back to your status quo. Now, after you've done this enough times and you know you're in your status quo position, you can gather up the cards. And this is where Professor Bessie Klondiked pairs of cards to the table. So what I do is I start here kind of on the west or on my left, up here to the north. Now I know that's the one I want to end up, you'll see in his video, there's going to be a Magician's Choice or an Equivoque coming up. But I know that's going to be on the north. Then I do to an east, and then the one straggler card can't be a pair, so it goes down here. So now you start with the spectator pointing to two piles, any two piles they want. If they happen to point to the one you don't want to get rid of, then you just pick the other one, and the magician says, okay, I'll discard that one. Now the magician points to two, obviously avoiding the one there because he doesn't want the spectator to pick that one. So in this case, the magician would go here, and the spectator can discard either one they want, let's say like so. And now the spectator will point to the remaining two piles, and obviously you want to keep this one, so you would discard this. And now you're in the position for the reveal. And this is where the acting comes in, where Professor Bessie said, now, wouldn't it be amazing, or whatever you want to say, after all of that shuffling, all of that dealing, all that cutting, I never saw any of the cards, and yet we have ended up with the six of spades. You could have picked any of these other cards. We did so many different types of things. You had so many choices, and yet, what's that? That wasn't your card? It's so frustrating. I don't even know why I do this trick. And as you can see, it's a nice surprise little ending. That's just the way I choose to do it. You could also say it's cleverly disguised as the queen. But that's a little move that I kind of came up with. If you just hold it maybe 3-4 inches above, you can do this. You'll learn this immediately. And you snap here, smartly snap. It will turn over, and it'll be a nice, startling, surprising finish. So, hope you enjoyed that. And if you want to have some fun with it, please do. Take care.